This is not a test.
This is our future.
Our progress, our opportunity.
This is years of experience.
Our dreams and aspirations.
This is 10,000 hours, and then some.
These are my skills.
Your skills. Our skills.
They make ideas happen.
Create new business opportunities.
Build apps never imagined.
And design devices that cure the impossible.
Because we are not bound by what's possible.
We are the makers of possible.
This is not a test.
Our skills don't come from classrooms.
They can't be defined by empty metrics or archaic systems.
They're refined on evenings and weekends.
Shaped under the pressures of disruption.
The pace of business.
The pursuit of mastery.
So we'll pass on the participation trophies.
The gold stars, the endorsements.
Because we are
the change makers.
The next big thing.
The talent, the skills.
And we know we have the opportunity to change the world.
This is not a test.
This is not a test.
This is not a test.
This is the future.
The new standard for measuring tech skills.
This is Pluralsight IQ.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar, Get Ready for the Web in 2018. Today, your host, John Papa, will help you master the technologies that matter most in the new year. Learn where to focus, which trends are worth your time, and what tools will help you create better products. My name is Lindsay Locke. I'm Pluralsight's Webinar Program Manager. I'll be your host for today, and I'm here if you have any questions about the webinar recording, future webinar topics, or anything related to the presentation interface. I'm very excited to welcome today's presenter, John Papa. John is a Principal Developer Advocate with Microsoft and a Pluralsight author. John, welcome to today's webinar.
Thanks for having me.
In addition to being a Pluralsight author, John is passionate about web and mobile technologies. He often enjoys speaking around the world at keynotes and sessions for conferences, including NGConf, Build, Ignite, VS Live, and others. John is a co-host of the popular Adventures in Angular podcast, author of the Angular Style Guide, several books, and many popular courses. Welcome. So before I hand everything over to John and we get started, I'm just going to go over a few things that you can expect during the webinar today. We are recording, so if you have to leave us early or you want to watch it again, we will share the recording as soon as it's available on our website next week. In addition to that, please ask us questions. Submit your questions in the chat box. At any point today, we'll queue those up for John at the end of his presentation. Let's do a quick sound check. The audio today should come from your computer speakers. We do not have a dial-in. If you lose audio or you're having problems, please try refreshing your browser or logging out and joining again if you experience any lag. If there are any other problems, please send us a message in the chat box and we'll try to help you out. In addition to the chat box and the other features in your webinar console panel, there are a couple cool things you should check out. You can expand the presentation window. Check out some really cool downloads on the resource panel to the upper left-hand corner. You can check out John's latest courses, his play-by-play. You can test your Angular IQ and get your score. Definitely do those things after the presentation, but check them out. You can learn more about John Papa in his bio. You can tweet at us, and then the very last thing, before you leave today, there's a super short 3-question survey. We'd love to get your feedback, so please give us your attention to that. We'd really appreciate it. And with that, I'm going to hand everything over to John Papa, and let's get started.
Thank you, Lindsay. And thank you, everybody, for coming today. So today, I wanted to talk to you all about some of the favorite things that I do every day. Every morning when I wake up, I look forward to that cup of coffee that I have. I look forward to sitting on the couch, kind of watching the sunrise, drinking that cup of coffee, And then it just really sets me in the mood and gets my life moving in the morning. Everybody's got their rituals. And the only thing bad about the cup of coffee is that, I'd like to do something else with it. I like to sit down and drink it while I code. So when I'm doing that, it's one of my favorite things in the morning, sets the mood for the day. Then something bad happens. That cup of coffee ends. And then I'm looking forward to the next cup of coffee. Because as I said, I really enjoy that cup of coffee. That's kind of how I roll. Now, the reason I'm getting into this with coffee is that we all have things that we really enjoy. And one of the things that most of us enjoy here on the call is to work with technology. Now, one of the problems with technology is that while we really enjoy what we're doing today, and it's the greatest thing that we have, and it really gets us moving, the thing that we're looking forward to next may be even better. So just like the coffee that you have now, the next one is the one that you're going to look forward to as soon as you finish the first coffee. So let's talk about how we can manage technology that we're looking at today, and then also look at what's coming in 2018, which is just a couple of weeks away. I have about 7 different things that I wanted to go through. And let's start with the first one, browser-compatible languages. The browser's changed quite a bit in the last 15 to 20 years. So since we've had the internet, we've had a lot of different kinds of browsers. We had a lot of different terms. We've had things like the browser wars. We've had the IE issues that we've had in the past. We've had a browser, it seems like every couple of years, which seems to be a leader and one that seems to be lagging behind. And one of the problems we used to have a lot with is the different browsers were not entirely compatible with each other. So we'd have to write code for each browser separately. I remember being a consultant back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I would write web applications. And if it had to work in Netscape and Internet Explorer at the time, the 2 leading browsers, it would cost almost 40, 50% more to do the application. Things like jQuery came out to help this for a while, and that really did quite a number on it. But what really helped is now all the browsers are following a very similar DOM model. So we have Safari, Firefox, Chrome, Edge, and many others. One of the things we can do now is look at this Can I Use website. And if you're not looking at it already, definitely check it out. It keeps up to date with all the features and what the browsers support. So when we're looking forward to what's happening next year in 2018, we need to know that these features that we're looking at, which browsers are they supported in? Now, just because they're more aligned now than ever doesn't mean that they're going to be completely compatible, especially since they're all what you call evergreen browsers, which means that all these browsers will automatically update themselves, so your users are getting new ones. So if you don't pay attention to the features, though, of what you're supporting in a browser, it really can be a roll of the dice. And it's not something that we really want to gamble on. So how do we combat this? First of all, we have to understand where JavaScript came from, especially in the web. With JavaScript, we started out a couple of years ago with ES5 was the latest version of it, ECMAScript 5. And that version was out for many years. And it was taking years for JavaScript to evolve from each version. In fact, there was no ES4 that actually hit the streets. So ES3 came out, and then many years later, ES5. Well, then ES6 came out. And with ES6, which is also now named ES 2015, they renamed it by year, they started realizing that, wow, the browsers are moving fast. So we need to make sure that we have different versions of JavaScript every year. Because by naming them by year, it'll push us to do this every year and push the web forward. We don't want our code and our browsers to get out of sync, because things that are moving so fast today, we need to keep up with them. All right, so we've got ES 2015, then we had ES 2016, which came out, and then ultimately 2017 came out this year. And we need to make sure we can keep up with these, because if we're using the latest version of ECMAScript and JavaScript, and we want to support some of these browsers, we need to make sure we know how to do that. So that's why we go back to that Can I Use. Can I Use will help us figure some of these things out. There's also another site that you should be aware of, and that's called Kangax, K-A-N-G-A-X. So both Kangax and Can I Use help us figure out what things in each of the browsers are supported. Here's an example of Can I Use where it's showing us, okay, we've got this site and we're looking up await. We want to use the await keyword for asynchronous functions. And it shows us all the browsers that support it. The green means supported. Red means it doesn't. And don't worry about IE there, because IE was then replaced with Edge. So Edge is the new Microsoft browser. So all the modern browsers will support that. And we can look up any features we want on this site. So really, we want to make sure we lean on this Kangax site and the Can I Use sites to help us figure out what is supported in JavaScript, CSS, and HTML on the web. And that's going to be more important moving forward than ever. Because all the modern features that we want to make sure that we can use those and still target our browsers. That's really the crux. So how do we take advantage of these new features but still target older browsers? That's where we enter things like TypeScript and Babel. TypeScript and Babel allow us to write code with the most leading edge features today, and they can transpile to any browser you want. So what we can do is say, all right, I'm going to use TypeScript or Babel, but I want my target browser to be ones that run with ES5 or with ES 2016. We can tell TypeScript or Babel, this is the target browser I want to use, and then we can just transpile to that particular language. So that helps us. And how do we know which target browsers we have? Well, if we're at a company, your IT department can tell you, like, here's the browsers that we must support. If you're at a company who serves the public, you can use some of your browser stack information to find out on the server how many people are hitting your site with analytics, what kind of browsers they're using, and come up with a rule of thumb, like once a browser goes below 1% usage, we don't support it anymore, we'll move forward. These are things you have to figure out as a company, say what browsers will we support so we can keep moving forward. Now, the best part about Babel and TypeScript is that there's zero risk. Now, I don't know how many times somebody can tell you in technology that there's zero risk in something, but this is one of those rare things where there's like no risk. And the reason there's no risk is because you can walk away at any time. So you can literally start with TypeScript or Babel, use it, maybe you're into it for a week, a month, a year, maybe you loved it for multiple years. And then later you're like, you know what, I don't want to go with this anymore. All you have to do is transpile your TypeScript or Babel into whatever target of JavaScript you want, ES 2016 maybe, and then just throw away the TypeScript and just keep using JavaScript. There is nothing wrong with doing that. And I've seen companies go that route. Most companies who adopt Babel or TypeScript, quite frankly, stick with it because they see the benefits, because it's always allowed them to use the latest versions of JavaScript. But if you do want to walk away, you can, which to me makes it a no-brainer because there's just no risk involved whatsoever. So that's the first tip, is we have to look forward to how we manage the multiple browsers. It hasn't changed in the sense that they're still constantly evolving, but the way we can keep up with it has changed. We can use tools like the Can I Use and Kangak sites. We can use TypeScript or Babel to make sure we transpile to the right platforms as well. So as long as we're using these, we don't have to worry about, oh, my users are using older browsers. And unless they're using a browser from 1994, I think we're okay. That kind of brings me up to the next step, which is your open source code editors. There are so many editors on the market today that people are using. Let's explore kind of how we think about editors and what we're looking for. I often hear at companies, hey, it'd be great if we all used the same editor everywhere. Well, the first time you mention that to a development team, you're going to notice that when you take a poll, everybody's using a different editor. It might be Visual Studio, could be Eclipse, could be Vim, could be TextMate, could be anything. There's so many editors out there and IDEs, and it really gets to a point where developers become very attached to whatever editor they have, whatever IDE they have. And why is that? Because they know the tool, they're comfortable in it, and they're efficient in it. And at the end of the day, isn't that really what you're hiring somebody for? You're hiring somebody for the skills they have and their efficiencies to make good decisions. So I feel like we should trust the developers to believe in it and use the decisions they have in their editors. Now, the ones that I really like that are out there, if you want to take a look at some, are VS Code, Atom, StackBlitz, and Vim. And there's probably 10 others that are just as awesome. VS Code is awesome. It's an open source one. That's one reason I like it. So is Atom. It's also open source. You can go to GitHub and check these out. One of the newer ones out there is called StackBlitz. It's not a full-fledged editor like you'd use on your local desktop, but it's great for a couple of very specific scenarios. StackBlitz is online. It's an online editor in the browser. So this makes it perfect for reporting bugs to open source projects, or for communicating with your team and saying, here's a cool idea I have. Let me create it in StackBlitz, and then I can share it with other people. Because one of the trends moving towards next year is sharing of information, not only just using open source, but when you've got a great idea, put it inside of something like StackBlitz, which is basically a more modern version of tools like Plunker or JSBin or JSFiddle, and using that and then sharing it with other teams. And then also Vim. Vim is extremely efficient for people who are very keyboard-centric. So here's a quick glance at VS Code. The VS Code editor is lightweight. It's like 60 or 70 meg, downloads in less than a minute, and you can get up and running under a minute. very fast, wonderful extensibility model, constantly keeping up, and they've got monthly updates. Here's StackBlitz. It's the online version of these browsers, these editors. And in there, we can edit what we want. We can save it. We can fork somebody else's example. We can share them. We can even sign in using a GitHub credentials. And they've got built-in templates for React and Angular out of the box that you can use, which is really great, depending upon which framework you're using. So at the end of the day, in 2018, I think we need to do away with the whole, hey, everybody at the company needs to use one editor, WebStorm, Atom, VS Code, whatever, and let people use the editors that they want, because there's so many good options out there. And as long as people are efficient, we should go that direction. Now, I mentioned some of these frameworks that constantly get heard out there. I don't think I've ever been asked in my entire career this question, a question more than this one. Hey, John, what framework should I be using? React, Angular, Vue, or fill in the blank? It seems like we're always trying to figure out what is the next great framework in JavaScript that we can use. Well, let's think about that one for a minute. We have a lot of choices, and I hear the term JavaScript flavor of the week quite a bit. The problem with that term is that we don't really have a flavor of the week with frameworks. We had a lot of them that have come out over the last 6-7 years, but I think we overgeneralize. Let me give you an example. People will say, okay, Angular, in one sense, I heard two different people in the same hour at the same company say this to me. Hey, John, Angular is just way too new. It's changing all the time. We can't use it. You can't keep up with it. Okay, what do you mean it's too new? Well, it's really only been around for a little while. At this point, it would have been around for 5 years. I mean, if you go look at the repos in Angular, it's been around and created in 2011. How many JavaScript libraries that have been around that long, right? Not many. You can probably count them on your hands. And then the other side of the story is, oh, this thing is old. It's really too, it's got old ways. It's not very modern inside the web. We need to move to something newer like React or Vue or something else. Well, we have to balance these. Do we really need to move to the latest thing all the time? Do we really need to make sure that we're on the hottest buzzword? In the same sense, we have to think about what is it we want in our company. And that's where we have to side with frameworks. In 2018, I think it's even more important than ever to really stop thinking about who's better and start thinking about who's better for me, for my company. And in 2018, we're going to have 3 leaders of the pack. This is kind of how this year has ended. And I think these will stay to the top, 2018, but they may change a little bit on who's rising faster. So Angular is still the leader of the pack in all these in a lot of places. And by Angular, I mean the new version of Angular, which they're now coming out with new versions every 6 months. The breaking changes they have are so minor, you wouldn't even know it by upgrading them. It's actually quite fantastic. And they have some tools that help you manage your versions, which is great for enterprises. So you can see, hey, is there anything I have in here that'll actually break? That's fantastic because version control is really important in large businesses. There's also React, which also changes about as frequently as Angular. They have a different versioning strategy, and they have just as good of a library structure and framework. 2 different approaches. They both do very similar things in different ways, and some developers will like one versus the other. But I've worked in both of these, and they're both fantastic. And I think these 2, which are ending this year as the top leaders, are going to continue into next year. The third candidate is one called Vue.js. Vue actually borrows ideas from the other 2 and many others. For example, if you explore what Vue does, Vue actually has some ideas from AngularJS, the first version of Angular. And it's also got some ideas that borrowed from React. It borrowed some ideas from Angular. It actually borrowed some ideas from Knockout.js as well, which was around a couple of years ago. And it said, let me try to find a way to do this in a more different perspective. This one is growing very, very fast and has a very strong community. So why did I pick these 3? It's not about best all the time. It's about what's the community supporting? What's the ecosystem look like? Will they respond to bug changes and fixes? Will they respond to feature requests? Is there a team behind each of these projects? And are they rising? Are they still rising in the industry? And are people using these in production today? Yes. All 3 of these really satisfy that. And they all have very, very strong followings, which is fantastic. So just being the best tool out there doesn't always win. Some of you may remember things like the VCR had VHS tapes in Betamax many years ago. And if you go look those up, you'll learn that in some ways people thought that The one technology is better than the other, but it's not necessarily always the one that wins. Sometimes it's more about community support, ecosystem, standards, and moving things forward. All three of these have those attributes, and they're all fantastic choices. The big key here is we're all going to benefit from this diverse ecosystem. It really won't help us if one wins. If one wins, it means the others aren't moving forward. Why would a company move forward? Think about monopolization. The U.S. has these rules against it with companies. If one company owns everything, what's the challenge for that company to move forward? What's their drive and motivation? By having a competitive environment, it actually helps them all. And these guys actually all work well together, these different communities. So moving on, the next step would be optimization, which becomes important for any JavaScript tools that you're using. You want everything to be fast, but what does that mean? What does fast really mean, and what is it we want to get out of it? So first, let's break this down into a couple different things. First, it's about experiences. We want amazing experiences, and they've got to be fast. So small, that's the first thing that helps with being fast. We want our JavaScript to be small. We hear a lot about, oh my gosh, that application is 18 meg. It'll take forever to get to the device. It's not small. We can't do that. That's important, right? We need to make sure that our JavaScript and our CSS and our HTML, all of our assets and our images are all small so we can deliver them to the browser faster. But that's not the only thing that determines fast. We also need to make sure that the code we write is fast and efficient, that it runs well, that it parses well, and follows what the V8 engine does with JavaScript. If we can take advantage of background processing, we should do that as well. So sometimes we can make sure that their code gets to the browser first, whether it's mobile, desktop, laptop, whatever, IoT device, and then we make sure that the rest of the code loads in the background. So sometimes we can split our code and have the stuff that runs essentially up front and then other stuff run in the background behind it. That actually changes the perceived speed of the application. Load what you need up front, let the user interact, and then load the rest. And just-in-time code is also important. Maybe it's not just background loading, but maybe you don't even load code until you determine that the user is going to need it. Maybe they're walking through some kind of a wizard on a screen or some kind of a ordering process. Don't get them to the end of the ordering process and load that code up front because they may not complete the order. But maybe they are about to complete it. And once they get to a certain stage, you can go, you know what? Now it's time to go load the rest of that code. Let me do that in the background with the browser. And by doing things just in time, to the user, it keeps everything moving lightning fast, and it doesn't load unnecessary code until you need it. So there's different techniques that we can use to follow all these. In the end, one of the coolest things we can do is something called code splitting. So imagine taking your code and you're like chopping it into two pieces and saying, all right, this one side of the log is going to be all the code that they need when they first load. The other side, and the other side of the split, isn't needed until later. I won't load that until they need it. Now imagine that that's half your application. It might be a 50-50 split, could be more significant. But now you're saying, instead of loading my entire app up front, you're only loading half of it. And the other half can be loaded later. So code splitting can help us. And code splitting means you have to design your app so it could be split into different places, different logical structures. This is why style guides and structural guidelines are really, really important in your app. Here's an example how you could use code splitting with an Angular application, and React and Vue have this kind of concept too. With code splitting, we might say, okay, don't load the dashboard information until somebody goes to the dashboard in our URL in the browser. And then they're saying here, load the children. Children in Angular is go loading a lazy loaded module. So the code has been split for this dashboard. The main app is already loaded. The dashboard is in a separate set of JavaScript files. There's a separate file over there. It's all split off. And then when somebody clicks on the dashboard, this code is saying, don't go get that module until somebody goes to this dashboard, and then it will go get it. So all these different frameworks have ways allowing us to do that. Code splitting is going to be very important as we build larger and larger applications. Now this is how Angular does it. That's that syntax here. So once we have these things, we also need to make sure we can optimize what's inside of the code. Now, Angular, React, Vue, they have different tools that do this, and all three of them can use Webpack, which is amazing. So with Webpack, you can spit out this thing called a stats file. And with Angular, here's how you get the Webpack stats file. You say, build my app for production, and then -- stats JSON. That'll actually create this JSON file which then allows you to run it with this tool called the Webpack Bundle Analyzer. So you just put that tool into use to point at that stats file, and it will then show you what's inside of your bundles. Now, this is fantastic because it gives you analytics into what did I just build? I just bundled all of my code into a single file or code split it out. Show me what's in there and how effective it is. And here's a link you can use to get to it. So once you run it, you might see some kind of a chart like this. Now, it'll color code it and show you different size rectangles. The color coding is just showing you different modules. You'll notice up there, I've got a session module in red. I have a speakers module in green. And we have other modules in blue and purple. Now, the ones that are larger are the larger size in the bundle. And if you hover over them, it'll tell you the sizes of those. You can dig down into different rectangles. But it also allows you to see what stuff is taking up more space. And it'll also point out maybe libraries that you have pulled in that you're not actually using. So it's a good way to inspect your application to see what's inside of what I think I delivered. Does it match? It's a fantastic tool. It allows us to do things like tree shaking as well. So imagine you're holding onto this tree and you're really strong and you and your friends, we'll get them all together. Your whole development team is holding this tree and they're shaking it. All the leaves that fall out, imagine they're all code. The leaves that stay in are the code you're using. The leaves that fall to the ground are the dead code from your application. So with Angular React Vue, with modern JavaScript, we can do something called tree shaking. And Webpack helps us with this, so do other tools. What it allows us to do is say, all right, go through my application and find the dead code. Take it out of my application and drop it to the ground. It optimizes our code and looks through our dependency chains to make sure that we can get rid of that. By doing that, we get additional optimizations, both in size of what's delivered and performance, because it doesn't have to parse all the code that we're not actually using. And we all know that we write code, and sometimes later we refactor it. We don't always go back and get rid of all the code that we're not using, unfortunately. So these tree shaking techniques will really help us. And next year, I don't think these two topics will be so leading edge. I think they'll be in everything we do. Tree shaking and code splitting are going to be an expectation next year. Tools are just going to require that we do this. And things like Webpack and Clojure and others are making it super easy to actually implement this in Angular and React and Vue and in our own plain old vanilla JavaScript. So we're just going to be doing it all the time. So if you haven't looked into these two yet, absolutely check out tree shaking and code splitting. Now, in the same vein of JavaScript, some of the things that we do to build JavaScript and web-based applications are going to change a little bit. We've already heard about the cloud. The cloud is this magical, wonderful thing that's going to solve everybody's problems in the world, right? It's really just allowing us to create services that we used to have to do on our own physical hardware and make it easier to use them. And in some ways, these are microservices that we can use. For example, did you know that you can tap into machine learning or cognitive services in different cloud platforms, both on Amazon and Azure and on plenty of others like Google and others too. So with cloud services, we can tap into different services maybe to figure out emotional recognition. Maybe point it at a face with a camera and figure out, is the person smiling or not? Or do facial recognition, or do a lot of cool different things that we could have. And this is code we normally have to write on our own. Now we can tap into services to do them. But there's even simpler things that we can do. So think about our modern architecture, and we've all seen this kind of a diagram. We've got our user interfaces. And at the bottom, we have our back-end business logic and data. Might be .NET, might be Java, could be Ruby, could be anything. And it could be a combination of all these things too. We need a way to make sure our user interfaces can talk to these many layers of back-end services, especially if we've got multiple back-end services. So how do we tie these things together for either a web or a mobile interface? This is where our API layer really becomes important. We didn't always have this kind of a thing, but I feel it's really important to have this, and next year more than ever, because as companies grow, you can't just always start from scratch with everything. Sometimes we're just going to make a new UI, and we'll add a few things to the back end, but mostly we just want to make a better way to use our products. So the user interface changes. We're using a lot of existing back-end services, maybe add one or two more, and then we need some glue to tie them together. And that's our APIs. And for our API layer, this is where we can really spend some time on things like Node, or we could spend some time on .NET with .NET Core on Linux, or we could do really fast Java services or Go. The key here is the hardest and most expensive part is going to be building the APIs and their supporting cast. because we're all used to building UIs. We're all used to building back-end services. This middle piece now, it's really a transient facade that helps us tie our UIs to our back-ends, can become very expensive because now we have to have servers and hardware and technology and infrastructure and CI/CD all to handle this middle layer. This is where we can use serverless APIs, things like Azure Functions, AWS Lambda, or Google. There's a lot of different ones out there where effectively we just write the functions that say, go get me the list of customers, or make the order and do a credit check. We write those functions in whatever our favorite language is, JavaScript or .NET or Java, and then we put it inside one of these platforms, and then it just runs. We don't have to provision servers. We don't have to decide all this stuff. And it can automatically scale. We can say, you know what, run this function, it's going to get hit really hard. I want to make sure you scale up when it's getting hit a lot, maybe during Black Friday if you're a consumer company, and then have it scale back down. And you only pay for your usage on these different platforms. The best part from a development standpoint is you have no infrastructure to deal with. You just write the code, stick it in the cloud, and now you have a little bit of glue that ties your back end to your front end. And it makes it seamless. So whatever platform you pick, serverless APIs are going to be huge next year. You may have heard of these quite a bit. Definitely check those out. Now, one of my favorite topics to talk about is experiences. I've worked in a lot of companies, and some of them have really focused on the user experience, and others have not. And the big difference for me is I know I personally lean towards having a great experience for the user. Because if you're building a consumer product, especially someone for the general public, the better the experience, the more likely they are to keep using your product. They'll spend more time in it, they'll spend more money in it, and they'll enjoy it more and recommend it to others, which is really what you want, is you want them to really enjoy what they're doing. For a business, you still want the experience to be great. It's a different kind of experience. You know, maybe a consumer, you have a guided experience. But for internal business, it's more for efficiency, like taking orders. But you want that experience to be good. You don't want your users to be saying, you know, I really know our app well. I know every place it makes an error and it makes me type the same thing 40 times. That's not a great experience. That's just monotonous. Make it so it's efficient. That could be the good experience. I think this will become more important next year because the better experiences we have, the more usable all of our apps will be, both internal for business, business to business, as well as external. One of the keys here is the time till your web app is usable. When you're building applications, we often look at these stats inside the browser. One of the most important stats is to figure out when does the browser become usable. That might mean in your application that the fields are on the screen, that some of the data has loaded, that the menus are up there. But it might not necessarily mean that all the background stuff is loaded as well. So how do you get it to the point where the minimal viable product for your user is ready on the screen, the time till first interaction is the shortest possible time? And that's one of the keys of creating great user experiences. It's visually ready and it's interactive. Let me repeat that. Your app has to be visually ready and it's interactive. Let the user start filling in a search for their products on your consumer site. Imagine they're looking for different Christmas presents they're getting. They're typing in their searches. Maybe the rest of the app isn't ready yet. That's okay. Let them type in what they want, press search, and see the results. They're not yet ready to make orders and to process their credit cards and other things. Get that first stuff up and running, let the user interact, let them keep moving. The longer you wait to get the app to be interactive, the higher the frustration level. And yes, some enterprise customers will sit there for 20 minutes waiting for a screen to load because that's their job. Wouldn't it be better if they were more efficient? Think of the money they're losing in that company by the app not being ready. And for consumer apps, we all know that if a website takes more than 2 or 3 seconds to load, we move on, go somewhere else. So there's important money tied to this visualness readiness. So there's a cool concept that I didn't make up. Credit the Palmer folks for doing this. It's called Purple. I really like this. And what Purple stands for is you want to first push your critical resources on the first initial route. So anything you need to get to that time to first interactivity up there in the first route, the main assets, the main CSS for that first page. If it's a search page for products, get it up there. If it's a search page for taking orders for your customers internally, or for entering work orders at a maintenance place. Get those first resources up there and think about code splitting as you're doing this. And then render it and get it interactive right away. Make sure we can render that code and get it interactive. That way the user is using it. And if we can, pre-cache any remaining routes using a service worker. The service worker is being supported in most of the major browsers today, and the ones that it's not, like Safari, it's coming very soon. They're all working on these things. At least that's what folks are looking at. Service workers allow us to create these applications so that we can cache any routes. We can cache data, we can cache HTML and JavaScript. What it allows us to do is say, once you've been to the site once, we will cache those routes so that when you go there again, you don't have to go across the network wire to fetch those assets. And of course, they can expire, and we can use hash codes to, go get new ones. But if it's the same exact URL and it's not expired, we can automatically show that, so we're not making the HTTP trip to go get the content. That makes it lightning fast. And, as you might have guessed, it allows it to work offline. And the last piece is lazy loading of Purple. You want to lazy load the rest of the app as the user navigates around. So think about this. If you were able to put just the critical stuff up front and render the app right away, and then start thinking and prefetching other routes that you might want to get them to, have it lazy load the app as it's going through, and then use a service worker to cache information that you want to make sure is fast for future reference, you can then really make your apps super fast, and they can even work offline. So this really gives us that fast, available offline work, and definitely the key to all this is the service worker. And where does all this come from? You might have heard this term PWA. PWA stands for Progressive Web Apps, and you can learn more about it from the short link here. A progressive web app effectively allows you to get all the advantages of what we just showed you by allowing it to get the time to first interactivity super fast, caches a bunch of those routes. You can do other cool things too with it, but that's the key. And then you can even run these on mobile apps as well. So now you can write a mobile app written fully in HTML, JavaScript, CSS with a service worker inside of a browser on a phone that runs offline and is just as fast as a native app in many cases. It's all about that time to first interaction. You might hear the time to first interaction a lot. It's what's going to improve the user experience. Like, why are we doing it? Just because we have new technology out doesn't mean we have to jump on it. PWA has been around for a couple of years, but it's now gaining a lot of steam because a lot of the browsers are supporting it. React, Vue, Angular, all three major frameworks support it now with their CLIs, so their command line interfaces. They make it easy for you to take advantage of this stuff, and it's going to become even more prevalent in 2018. The final tip is all about open source. I'll tell you a little story about a couple of years ago. This was pretty prevalent when I was a consultant in the industry, not too long ago. You go to a shop, you talk to some folks inside, and they say, you know what, we really like to use this library. I've seen it on the web, it's cool. We need something like this inside of our company. Well, immediately we'd start thinking, we can't use what's in open source. So let's go create one of our own, not built here syndrome. It's because there was this idea that anything the company used, they'd have to pay for the license. They had to pay thousands or millions of dollars for some software that they'd have to use, even if it was almost exactly the same as what some other company was doing or they saw on the free open web. Now, fast forward a couple of years to not too long ago, and a lot of companies were starting to think, it would be great to use this open source software, but, who's supporting it? What happens if it goes away? And do we have legal rights to use this open source? And those are good questions to think about. But almost always the answer is yes, there's a way for everybody to benefit from open source, not just consuming it, but also from taking action and using it. Let's talk about what it's going to do for us next year even more. I feel like everybody in this community needs to participate. And that doesn't just mean use an open source library. It means contribute back. If you find there's a problem with some library and it's popular and it's being supported in the community, go ahead and open up an issue, or better yet, create a pull request. Change the source code. Let the folks know, hey, I was using this library. I found this mistake. Here's the scenario that replicates and reproduces it. I believe this fix will actually solve it. And better yet, show them a working example using a tool like StackBlitz. And then maybe even take a little video snapshot with one of those free tools in the web. I like to use a tool called Snagit from TechSmith. It's like $30, I think, and I use it and I make a little video for 20 seconds and show the reproduction of how it works and how I fixed it. And put it inside of GitHub. Whole thing takes about 10 minutes, and you just made everybody else's lives better. And You made your life better because now you're fixing open source projects that you're already wanting to consume. You don't have to worry about forking it and having a completely different version. One of the other keys is following their guidelines. I see pull requests made out there that do everything I just said. And then in some cases, I see issues in pull requests that say, this thing sucks, I won't use it. Or this thing sucks, I want to rewrite it, we should do it this way. That kind of an attitude is difficult because, remember, there's humans behind all this software. And the people writing it would read that. And how would you read that if somebody wrote about your code? So think about what are the guidelines they have. A lot of these libraries will have guidelines on the web at how you should contribute and what you should do. So follow their guidelines. They'll tell you like the steps to reproduce it, what they need to make sure that it actually follows their licensing and guidelines too. And respect. Respect is one of the keys. We have a tendency these days to see how on social media and online it's easy to disrespect other folks. But remember, at the end of the day, somebody or many people have put their hearts and souls into software. And we want to make sure that we respect how they created it and what they did. They came to those conclusions. They might be wrong in some cases, but being right isn't the most important thing. Respecting each other and getting to a better solution is. And I think if we remember that when we're writing information online, creating these issues, instead of saying, this thing sucks, you should fix it, say, I was using this, I appreciate all that it does here, I'm trying to solve this problem. It didn't work for me. Here's how I think it could work. What do you think? Or even offering a solution. And probably the most important piece, if not respect, is innovation in the open. Anytime they come up with really cool ideas, I hear a lot, oh, I can't show that because that's at my company. Well, maybe your app is at your company, but sometimes the things that we're developing can be shown publicly. And if you're worried about legal concerns, make sure you go to your legal department with your company and really go through the motions of figuring out what do we have to do to make the code we've written inside of our company freely available on the open web. We're going to see more and more of this out there. Think about some of the most successful libraries out there that companies like Netflix and PayPal and Walmart and others are using that are an open source. RxJS is one of these examples. Runs a lot of what Netflix does. These things were built based on other ideas out in the open, and then now everyone else can benefit from those. It does take effort to make sure that legal and security and your companies are cool with it, but the benefit is huge. It also shows that your company is a great place to work and that other developers and innovators will want to work there too. So to sum things up, we looked at these 7 different categories of things that we can look forward to next year. And I think that the open source is going to be one of the hugest things that's going to change. We're now going to be thinking more about this is where it belongs, as opposed to, geez, I wish I could work with this. In the end, I want to leave you with one thought, though. No matter what we do, we build technology for humans. It's not about the code. It's not about the artistic value of it. It's not about how cool it looks. Those things are fun. But we build technology for humans, and that has never been more apparent than it is now and will be moving forward. So I want to thank you, and I'm going to hand it back to Lindsay and see if we have any questions to answer.
All right, thank you, John. So yeah, no shortage of questions coming in about which framework to use, but I think you pretty much covered that in your presentation. I'm going to try and dig deeper on some of the questions coming in on that subject, however. So looking at this, there was a question about, where did it go? I'm so sorry. Ember.js, whether or not there was a future for it. Is it still a good choice for 2018? It wasn't listed in your top 3.
Yes, Ember.js. That's another very popular framework. They came out with a newer version about a year ago. I don't think it's going to be as popular as the other 3 for next year, though. Does that mean if you're using it, you should stop? Absolutely not. If it works for you today, it's still going to work tomorrow. But it might mean that maybe for future projects, you start looking at some of the other ones, just to think about the future.
Great. Did you have any comment on the trend of dropping native app development in favor of progressive web apps?
I don't know if there is a trend for, I can't speak to that. There might be. I don't know. I don't have any evidence to show a trend of dropping native app development for anything, but I do see PWAs are becoming very, very popular. And I think in a lot of cases, they can do everything you need without having to worry about going through native app processes. So yeah, I do think PWAs, as you saw in my presentation, are going to be very, very popular next year and moving forward.
Awesome. We had a question come in from Andreas about PWAs on iOS. Andreas says, what about PWA on iOS? You only mentioned Chrome.
Yeah, and I just typed this one in here too. So iOS right now does not support fully the PWA service worker standard because most of PWA relies on the service worker idea. So right now that's not there. I do know that I work for Microsoft and we do support it in our browsers like Edge, and it works in Chrome and other browsers too. I fully expect that this is going to be one of those things that changes in iOS and Safari in the near future. I have no insider information on it, but there are no end of requests asking for Apple to do this.
Awesome. So as you're looking through these questions, if you see any that stand out to you, for sure jump in. There are tons of questions coming in. We're going to try and get to as many of these as possible. I will remind everyone that's in the audience that we did record the presentation, and we're going to share it with everyone as soon as it's available.
Would you like me to just read through some of these as I'm going through?
Sure, yeah, go right ahead and I can throw some at you as well.
Okay. So I'm just going down here. Paul Hale is asking, what are your thoughts on avoiding JS framework lock-in and writing PWAs using vanilla web components and service workers? I think that's perfectly fine too. Just like some people really like using a framework, which is my preference. I've done a lot of pure vanilla JavaScript and using web components. I feel like the frameworks still offer enough value where I'd stick with those to write service workers and PWAs. But if you feel like you want to use vanilla JavaScript, I can't see any reason why that's your skill that you shouldn't stick with that. To me, the big advantage of not going that route is that I always end up writing more code and handling more things that a lot of these frameworks actually handle for me, which is why I do that. But I've done it. I can't say that it's a bad thing to do. And then here's a question about how does ASP.NET, I believe it means core, fit in this presentation? It doesn't really fit into this one specifically, because I'm talking more about the web itself. But ASP.NET Core is a fine tool to use to generate server-side applications using Microsoft's technology, and that works both on Linux and on Windows servers. What tool is industry standard for cross? Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say there's an interesting question that came in about convincing your boss to adopt new technologies, or at least leave him or her interested.
Yeah, that's always a tough one, right? It depends on relationships. This is where that human factor comes in. First, you have to understand what motivates your boss. Just like your boss has to understand what motivates you as an employee, before pitching an idea, we often think about the idea as what would convince me? What convinced me to use this? And that's a good place to start. But your boss or leader may have a different perspective. What makes them happy? What makes them feel successful at work? Is it the coolest, latest technology? Is it the fastest? Is it, what is it for them? Figure out how it fits in your business model. Think about that hard. Maybe even ask them questions about what's important to you. What would cause you to have more success next year? How can we help? And then think about how you can pitch those ideas. Because in the end, nobody's going to want to let you move to a new technology just because it's new and cool. And even if it's just saying, well, it's faster. Well, how much faster? Like I hear that about React and Angular now. Well, they're faster. One's faster than the other by 1 millisecond. Really? Is it even a millisecond these days? Is that really going to be worth me rewriting a $10 million project? Whereas some of these things just aren't great arguments anymore. So you really have to think about what is it that motivates your boss. And that's a difficult thing to do, but it really comes from communication. Good question. I'm seeing one here about cross-browser testing, industry standard for it, from Denise. I don't know if there's an industry standard. I use a couple different things. So on the server, I use tools to test, like there's things like a Jest as a new framework. We use Mocha and other things for testing frameworks, or Protractor for end-to-end. And then to actually run these tests, there's tools like Browser Stack, which will allow you to run multiple of these in the cloud. And there's many other tools and products that you can use to do this. Microsoft Cloud has one that allows you to run against all of them. The key for me is finding a tool or a cloud service that allows you to run your application in every target browser that you need. And a lot of these services will allow you to do that very easily these days, which saves you from having to buy every mobile device with every browser and every tablet and laptop. It's fantastic. I'm scrolling down here, looking at some others. With popularity of small API surface area from Sean Vaus, like React and Vue, do you feel Angular still has a place in the enterprise? Where at? Personal preference. API surface area. I don't think that there really is a small API surface area for React and Angular. Both of them have a lot because React has its friends that come with it too. So with those, honestly, React, Vue, and Angular, I've used all three. I think all three are the same level of learning to get to a basic app. It's when you have to build large, more complex apps, I think that the paths change a little bit. And it really does become personal preference. I've built very scalable apps with all of these, and they work great. So to me, it ends up being, where does your personal mindset go? Like, how do you like to think and design? Any of these three, I think, will be very easy for you to live with. And I don't think there's a wrong decision here. So the best advice I can give you is, write an app with each one for one day each. Write a proof of concept. Share it with your team, talk it over, and then by the end of the week, you'll have a decision.
Awesome advice. I would probably say we have about 2 more questions, and then we'll have to wrap it up because we're close on time.
Okay, I'll just randomly pick some here. Can you tell us a little more about Angular in the context of Azure Functions, AWS Lambda, and such? Well, really, Angular is just the client-side technology, or React or Vue. But Azure Functions and Lambda and serverless functions, where they come into play to me is with a client-side framework like Angular or React, you build your application, but you need to talk to a backend server somewhere. Azure Functions allow you to really create a very flexible, highly scalable server that allows you to talk to backend databases or cognitive services or Java or .NET, and you can still use your favorite technology there. So to me, that's where these cloud services are just really changing the way we develop client-side framework applications. Let me go here to, hey, Rupam Roy, I know you. I'll answer your question. Java versus ASP.NET Core versus Node on the server. What's most recommended for web APIs? Rupam knows me, and my preference is Node.js. Does that mean the others are bad choices? No, absolutely not. I feel like for a web API in the middle, I would first look at serverless functions, but if you're going to go the route of creating your own server, I actually prefer using Node because it allows me to keep with React, Angular, Vue's same language. Effectively use JavaScript everywhere. And let's see if we can pick one last one, and then we'll call it a day. I'm going to remend in the middle. You mentioned VS Code. Do you have a URL for that one? I don't see it. And which IDE you recommend? Well, if you want a full IDE, my favorite two have always been IntelliJ and Visual Studio. But I like a code editor. And if you want to look up the VS Code URL, you can just go to code.visualstudio.com, and then you can download that. It really is a preference thing. I think that probably is enough time for what you're looking for, Lindsay.
I believe so. I almost want to just ask this one question because I think this is like the best vocabulary term of the day. What are your favorite tree shaking ES2015 module concatenation tools?
Concatenation tools. There's a lot of big terms in there, aren't there, Lindsay?
Yeah.
Yes. So when you're using a lot of these frameworks, the great thing is a lot of them do it out of the box for you. So Uglify is starting to move more towards this as well. Basically, I rely on the CLIs these days to do my build process for me for React, Angular, or Vue. So a lot of that does tree shaking under the covers. To give you an example, the Angular team has been doing tree shaking for a while, but with each new major version, one of the changes they keep making from version 4 to 5 and probably again in 6 is they improve the tree shaking with the underlying technology. So the best part about that is if you're using their CLI tools, you just get it for free. You don't care what's under the covers. So I recommend looking at the CLIs of React, Vue, and Angular to do that. And I'd like to say one last thing, if you don't mind, Lindsay. Any questions that folks have? I didn't get to a lot of these here. And I see a lot of people, I've recognized names and a lot of great questions. If you have questions, feel free to hit me up on Twitter. My Twitter handle is up on screen, I believe, John_Papa. I'd be happy to answer questions there too.
Excellent, absolutely. Please submit your questions on Twitter, continue the conversation. John, we're so happy to have you here, taking the time out today to answer these questions. And thank you everyone for submitting your questions and sticking with us and participating in today's discussion. This has been very, very educational and wonderful. John, once again, thank you. We're going to publish this recording. Give us a few days to put this up on our website, and we'll send an email out as soon as it's available. So with that, I'm going to close us out, and I wish everyone a wonderful day and a wonderful end of 2017. Here's looking forward to 2018.